This evening, the title of the talk is the same title as the weekend, which is The Study Group as Collective Practice. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And for the first time ever, the other day, I thought I'd look up study in the dictionary. I've never done that before. And I know lots of people have a real problem with the word study, and I've never quite understood why. But when I looked at the dictionary, I began to understand it. I thought, actually, that word is completely wrong. There's no aspect of that word in the dictionary that I've got at home anyway, which really describes what we do in study groups. So I was talking to Manjusia just before the talk, and I said, I think we should change the name actually to Dharma Kata. Talking Dharma, not talking about the Dharma, but talking Dharma, Dharma Kata group. So let's change the title of the talk to Dharma Kata as Collective Spiritual Practice. Just get my notes out. There we are. Done the first bit there. So study, back to that word, Dharma Kata. We often see Dharma study as something that we do so that we can practice what we studied later on. So it's a kind of preparation for practice. It's not actually practice in itself. But for me, studying the Dharma has always been my main practice. Studying, reflecting has always been my main practice. It's what I get most out of. And when I'm studying the Dharma, I don't feel I'm doing something now so that I can practice that later. Sometimes it does have that aspect. But for me, the studying is itself practice. And of course, the same goes for study groups, Dharma Kata groups. I think very often people think of them as sort of you talk a lot about the Dharma so that you can later go on and put what you've talked about into practice. And of course, there is that aspect to it. But actually, the study group, for me, is a practice. And when I moved to what was then Vajrakuta, the study retreat centre in North Wales, long time ago now, many years ago, that was, for me, studying with mainly order members quite a lot, was a really great practice. And I learned a lot about what a study group really is during that time. I'm just going to look at my watch because I promised this would be 40 minutes long. So that's 1:15 now. Yes, so I want to say this evening, I want to talk about the study group or the Dharma Kata group as a spiritual practice. What I've noticed when I talk to order members, because I do teacher training and I've done a number of training retreats in how to lead a study group, what I've noticed that very often an order member who leads a study group doesn't really know what they're supposed to be doing. They haven't got a very clear idea about what a study group is. What's the point of it? What's the purpose of a study group? And therefore, they haven't got a very clear idea of what they're supposed to be doing in leading it. And therefore, it can be quite fuzzy and, sometimes you don't get very much out of it because nobody quite knows what they're supposed to be doing. So I think it's good to be really clear about what a study group is. And there isn't just a study group. There are different kinds of study groups, and the different kinds of study group depends on many things. How often you meet, is it a regular study group or is it a one-off? Is it just a discussion about something or is it, I don't know, detailed study about a text? But one of the most important aspects of study groups, the different kinds of study groups, is the kinds of people you have in that group. And I'm thinking specifically of the level of involvement of the people in that group. So a study group for beginners is a very different animal to a study group for order members. And a study group for mitras is a different animal again. So you don't just get a study group and this is what you do in a study group. You get this is what you can do in a beginner's study group, and you do something else in an order study group and so on. So it's very contextual. This evening I'm going to talk about mainly order study because that's what we're doing this weekend, but I'll say a few other things as well. But what do we do in different kinds of groups? What's relevant to beginners? What's relevant to mitras? What's relevant to order members and so on? And of course you get different shadings in there as well. There's mitras and then there's mitras of arts ordination as well. That's a slightly different category. I think one of the best ways to look at study groups, a kind of framework to look at study groups, the structure is through the 3 levels of wisdom. I say the levels of wisdom because that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about them as levels. There are different ways of talking about them. You can call them the 3 wisdoms, the 3 gateways to wisdom. But today I'm going to talk about them as levels. And you know them already, but I'll just rehearse them very quickly for you. The first one is Sutta Maya Panya, to use the Pali. S-U-T-A, not S-U-T-T-A. And Sutta there means hearing, listening. And the Buddha's early disciples called Savakas. Savaka comes from the word Sutta, S-U-T-A. So Savakas were listeners, they were hearers. And Sutta Maya Panya means something like wisdom gained through hearing another, someone who's wiser than yourself. The Pali English Dictionary is quite interesting on this. It says Sutta, hearing, listening, but then it says in a special sense. And then it says revelation. So Sutta Maya Panya isn't just listening to any old thing, it's listening to the wise. The wisdom is being revealed to you from the wise. So that's Sutta Maya Panya. The second level is Cinta Maya Panya. Cinta, C-I-N-T-A, means thinking. That's all it says in the Pali English Dictionary, thought. But we could, add to that reflection, thought reflection. So the idea is that first you listen and then you reflect on what you've heard. And Bhante, standing more or less here, although it probably wasn't here, it was probably in the dining room when that was a shrine room many, many years ago now. Yeah, it was, long, long time ago. He said that for every 1 hour of listening you do, you should do about 100 hours of reflecting. So it's, reflecting is really important. And so that's the second level of wisdom. And then the third is Bhavana Maya Panya. Bhavana, you know the word Bhavana, as in Metta Bhavana, development, cultivation. And very often, Bhavana Maya Panya is understood as being wisdom through meditation. But I tend to think that Bhavana must be connected with the word Bhava, becoming. And I think it really means you becoming wisdom at that point. In the first instance, you hearing wisdom. The second instance with Cinta, you're thinking it through and making it somewhat your own by really reflecting on it. But in the third level, Bhavana, you are becoming that wisdom. You become a living embodiment of that wisdom. So those are the 3 levels of wisdom, very briefly. So how does that relate to different levels of study groups? Kind of obvious, isn't it? That when you've got a beginner's study group, your job as a study group leader is maybe Sutta Maya Panya, because they don't know much about the Dharma yet. So your job is to tell them about the Dharma, because they don't know it. They can't think about the Dharma yet, because they don't know what it is. So you'll be doing a lot of teaching. You'll be conveying information to them. Yeah. Mitras. It's quite interesting with the Mitra training course. The idea is that they read some material before they come to the group. Hopefully they do. They don't always manage, but let's hope they do. Well, that means that you don't have to do that reading in the group. That means the group is discussion, which means that you can spend a lot more time on Cinta Maya Panya. You don't have to keep telling them stuff. And this is something that I suppose it's a bee in my bonnet. I've got a number of bees in my bonnet. And one of them is that I think as a teaching community, we do a bit too much Sutta Maya Panya. We just keep telling people stuff. What should we do this evening? I'll give a talk or we'll do something. And you keep giving people more and more information. And that can be really good depending on the person. But I don't think we spend enough time helping people to reflect on the information. Maybe they don't need any more information. Certainly Mitras, they're full up, I think, with information. And I think one of the main purposes of a Mitra study group, a Dharma Kata group, is to encourage the Mitras to think. And I'll say more about that in a moment. And then there's order study group. Well, an order study group is a whole different animal, really, because especially if you're all, if Subhuti leads an order study group, it's a bit different, or Padmaloka. But, if it's one of us leading a group with a bunch of people and we're all more or less just order members, well, what do you do? What are you supposed to be doing? Well, I think, obviously, in an order study group, unless you're Subhuti or someone like that, you're not going to be doing much Sutta Maya Panya because you all know more or less the same. So what are you supposed to be doing? Well, I think the main point of a discussion group for order members is to reflect collectively on the Dharma. And that gives a very important clue as to what your role is as the study group leader. Say more about that in a moment. But then I think also, why don't we go to the next one, Bhavana Maya Panya? Because, we should be reflecting on the Dharma together. It should be a collective reflection. Well, what comes out of reflection is wisdom. And so, Bhavana Maya Panya, we can think of order study as being Chinta and Bhavana Maya Panya, sometimes combined, sometimes a bit more Chinta, sometimes a bit more Bhavana, becoming the Dharma. I remember years ago, Vajrakuta, the study group, the study leader study centre, and I was leading a group for order members. I can't remember what we were talking about, but suddenly one of the order members said, I've got to confess something. And he confessed something there and then in front of us. Had nothing to do with what we were discussing, but it was as if the pressure of the Dharma just forced it out of him. He just had to confess. It was really on his mind, and I suppose the Dharma was making it more and more on his mind, and he thought, I can't go on anymore, I just have to confess something. So I'm going to talk a bit about that now. So my main talk is going to be about not about leading study for beginners, but leading study for people who already know something about the Dharma. So what do you do with them? How do you lead a group? How do you help a group reflect on the Dharma? Better look at my notes now. Where am I? Yes. So, let's say you're leading a group. Let's say it's here in an order event, or maybe it's for mitras or something, and you decided, I'm going to try and help people to reflect. How do you do this? I think one of the main things is to desist from teaching all the time. Teaching in the sense of giving information, because it's a kind of default setting that order members, teachers often fall into, that they keep on giving more information. And when they're asked a question, if you teach, I don't know if you've noticed this about yourself. You give a talk or something like that, and you say any questions, and someone asks a question. Do you answer it? And I expect you would say, if I know the answer, I would give the answer. If I don't know the answer, I would say I don't know. Yeah, that's good. That's really honest, and that's a really good thing. But should you answer the question even if you know the answer? Sometimes I think that's the least creative way of dealing with a question. So the first thing you can do if you want to lead a more reflective study group is, if somebody asks a question, wait before you answer it. Just hold on, wait a minute. Before I answer that question, is there something else I can do with it? Because if you answer the question and it's the right answer, that's the end of that discussion. There's no more to be said. That's the answer. Oh, okay. Next point then. So then the next thing. You haven't done anything with it, but you could draw the answer out of the people in your group. And, often, when I say that in my teacher training things, I say, well, how do you do that? And then people often say, oh, well, you could ask everyone in the group what the answer is. Well, you could do that. That's one way of doing it, open it up to the group. You could just stop the group and stop anyone from answering that question. Whoa, stop, don't answer. Let's think this through collectively. Or you could think it through with the questioner. Should we do that together? You ask me a question and I say, well, I could answer that question. Thinking to myself, I could answer that question and be really clever and show people how much I know. Or I could say, should we try and find the answer together? Oh, that's a good idea. And then if you try and find the answer together, what you're doing is you're not only encouraging the person you're talking to reflect on the Dharma, but you're modelling the second level of wisdom. You're modelling how to do it. Let's, instead of look up the answer on Google or ask someone who knows, let's try and figure it out. Let's think our way through this answer and see if we can come up with its question, see if we can come up with an answer. So one of the things I often say in teacher training is stop answering questions. You keep answering questions all the time and it's boring. Do something else with a question. So those are two things you can do. You can open it up to the group. You can get into a dialogue with someone and dialogically get to the answer together. Or you could say, stop. Let's all think about this quietly together. Yeah. Or you could say, let's hold that up to next week. I want you to reflect on that next week and come up with what you think the answer is for next week. So there's so many things you can do with a question. But if you're beginners, don't do that with beginners so much because they need to know more. But for people who already know a lot about the Dharma, now what they need is not more information and not more answers, but they need to be shown how to reflect. What is reflection? My favourite definition, it's not really a definition of reflection, but although I use it as one, it comes from a novel called Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. How many of you have read that novel? Good. Wonderful novel. It's about a man, John Ames, who's what we in this country call a vicar, I think a pastor, in a small town called Gilead. And he's got a young wife. He's quite an old man by now, but he's got a young wife, someone from his congregation. And they've now got a young son. And this man, John Ames, knows he's going to die of old age before his son gets old enough to really know him as a man. So the novel is made up of letters from John Ames to his son. It's just letters all the way through. Very, very reflective novel. So one way to learn how to reflect is read reflective writers. And that's a really great novel for that, reflection. Anyway, one day he wakes up, John Ames is writing about waking up, and he's waking up feeling grief. And he says in his letter, it's always been my custom to investigate my grief. And then he says, and this is it. He says, because there is something I must dwell on, because I know more than I know, and I must learn it from myself. That's a definition of reflection. There is something I must dwell on, because I know more than I know, and I must learn it from myself. What you're trying to do when you're leading a reflective study group is try and get people to learn not so much from other people, but to learn from themselves. Yeah, that's really what we're trying to do. So, stop answering questions and see yourself as not so much as an answerer of questions and a giver of information, so much as an enabler of thought. An enabler of reflection, an encourager of reflection. And then the next thing you have to do is keep people on task. Keep people on task. This is something, I don't know how many groups you've been on audit events. You know, you break up into groups, somebody's given a talk and you all break into a group and somebody leads that group. And I don't know if you've noticed, but very often the audit member leading the group doesn't really lead it. They don't really lead it because they don't feel qualified to lead other order members. They're just an order member, you know, so they don't really lead it. So it doesn't really get led. And therefore it doesn't really go anywhere. It's just all over the place. It's just chit-chatting and talking, or anything that anybody says goes. And at the end of it, you think, well, I could have spent 2 hours doing something a bit better than that. It was okay, it was quite pleasant, but it didn't really lead anywhere. It didn't go deep. Nothing really happened. So this is to you, group leaders here, when you're leading an order study group or an order reflection group, you need to lead. You need to really lead it. And one way you do that is keep everyone on task. So when anyone goes off on a tangent, because you know what happens is you get people in your group, extroverted thinking types. They say the first thing that comes into their head. So, you know, you read a bit of the text and it just reminds them of something, so they say it. And it's got nothing really to do with where the text is going, and you don't really want to go there. So stop it. Stop them from doing that. Just say, oh, it's not really any. You have to do it politely, of course, but you've got to stop them from just whatever comes into their head saying it, you know. Or if they say it, just let it go. Just don't follow it, because this is where you want to go. This is where you're going. And then the long storyteller. You have to stop them. No, here they go again. You can just see they're just getting ready, and you can tell it's going to be a long story with little bits and pieces to it. And everyone's eyes goes glazed, and they're just waiting for the story to end. You need to stop them from doing that. Stop. And it's hard, I know, especially for English people to do that because we're so polite. But you need to be less polite as a study group leader. It's for everyone's benefit, including the long storyteller, because they'll be boring the pants off of everyone wherever they go. So it's really good for them to understand that your long stories bore people, so you need to stop doing it. You'll have a much better life, a much better social life, if you stop telling those long stories. So don't let them carry on for the rest of their life doing it, because you're not doing them any favours. So stop them. And then the joker. The person in the group always has to make a joke about anything. And every time they make a joke, it's not really funny, but everyone goes hee hee hee, and everyone's energy goes down a bit. So you just lose energy when that joker keeps on making jokes all the time. So stop them from doing that. Just have a little word with them and say, can you please stop making those jokes? It doesn't really get us anywhere. We're trying to build up a head of steam here. We're trying to really get into the Dharma. And what you do, it just steam goes off like that. So let's not do that. So you know the kind of people. So you've got the long storyteller, the person who just says the first thing that comes into their head willy-nilly, and you've got the joker. There is another one, isn't there? The person who likes to show off their knowledge. They start telling you stuff, and it's all really good Dharma, but it's not really to the point. It doesn't really help the discussion go deeper. It's what some would remember once referred to me as refined papancha. So you're just papanchering away about the Dharma. It doesn't really get anywhere. So you need to stop that too. So one of your jobs is to stop energy from leaking away out of the group, because you need energy for a study group to go deeper into the Dharma together. So you've got to stop all that. So this is one of your jobs, you study group leaders, this weekend. And the rest of you can watch how they do, and just to make sure they do that. So the study group needs to be concentrated, absorbed in the Dharma. So, what's next? The next thing is to, again, I talked about modelling being an example of thinking about something, reflecting on something. Another way you can do that is to learn how to think publicly, because that's what it is really, isn't it? A study group, you're trying to think publicly. It's harder for some people than others because there are different kinds of thinkers. There are extroverted thinker types, and their thinking only happens publicly anyway. That's how they think. They can't think they're on their own when they're on their own. It's not possible. They have to have other people to think with. So you've got those kind of people, and I often say that study groups are heaven for extroverts and hell for introverts. And the reason for that is because extroverts love it, just chatting away, talking, and as soon as you read a bit of the text, then the extroverts come in, they start talking, and the introverts don't. And I don't know if there's a correlation here, but it could be that introverts are slow thinkers. I'm not quite sure whether they are, but you might get extroverted fast thinkers and extroverted slow thinkers and introverted slow and fast. I don't really know. But if that's the case, then I'll just change that. The study group is heaven for an extroverted quick thinker and hell for an introverted slow thinker. So you need to model thinking. So sometimes that means stopping the discussion. Yeah. So somebody comes up with a problem or a discrepancy. Well, that doesn't really fit in with what Banji said there, does it? Oh no, it doesn't, does it? And then what people they try to swarm around it and fix the problem quickly. You don't have to fix it quickly. Stay with the discrepancy. Stay with the problem. Stay with it and think, consider slowly together. And you need to stop the group from talking sometimes. Let's say somebody asks you a question and you say, I'm not going to answer that question. You who answered it, you asked it. Let's see if you can answer the question. Let's see if you can think it through. Stop everyone else from coming in, because what happens, 2-3 seconds of quiet and someone is going to come in. They're going to come in and try and answer the question themselves. Stop that from happening. whoa, no, I asked him. He's trying to think about it, so let's just wait. And we can all think about it ourselves, but let's just wait a bit. So just stop the discussion, have a bit of thinking time. That really helps the introverted slow thinkers a lot, because they can't keep up with a quick conversation. They just can't keep up. And by the time they've thought of something to say, they're 2 or 3 subjects behind. It's too late now. It'd be embarrassing to say, oh, by the way, I thought this. Well, we were talking about that half an hour ago. So you need to stop the conversation sometimes, and that allows the quieter people, the introverts, to say something. So you need to do that. It's quite scary thinking publicly for some people, for some introverted people. It's quite a scary thing to do, especially if you're the leader. But it's a really good thing to do. Give it a try when you're next leading a study group. You know, when it's all a bit fast and furious, you can just say, whoa, it's going too fast for me here. I can't get my head around this bit here. Let's just think this through together. And it's almost like you give everyone the task now. Hey, we've got a task. Let's think this through together. We don't really know the answer. You think you know the answer. I don't think you do really. So let's really try and figure it out together. So together, you're reflecting on the Dharma, and you get this collective feeling of reflection. And when I was at Vajrakuta, leading study for order members, when I got there, I thought, blimey, every now and then I'm going to be leading a week's study for order members. Me. I know there's going to be order members in that group who know more about the Dharma than me, and some who are going to be more experienced than me, and so on. So what's my task? What am I supposed to be doing with them? And that's when I realized that my task is to bring about a context in which people can reflect together on the Dharma. That's the task. Few words about leading study. I think that leading a study group is probably, for most of us, the most difficult form of teaching. And I think that because it needs a number of different skills. Let's contrast it with giving a talk. Giving a talk, the thing about giving a talk is quite hard to do for some people because you have to write it beforehand, you have to structure it and so on, then you have to speak to people, you have to use your notes and somehow connect with people as well. So there's quite a lot to it. But what makes it easier is it's all under your control, more or less 100%, unless you get a heckler. It's all under your control. You know, you decide what you're going to talk about, when you're going to talk about it, and so on. So it's all under your control. You do all the preparation, then you give the talk. In terms of sport, it's a bit like archery. You know, nobody's going to get in the way. There's the target, and you know, nobody's going to get in the way and knock you over or anything like that. So it's all down to you. Same with the talk. Or in terms of music, it's like you've written a piece for the piano and you're going to play it to everyone. No one's going to stop you from doing that. Leading a study group's not like that at all. Leading a study group has to be improvisational. So in terms of music, it's more like you're the leader of a jazz group. Yeah, and you've got a theme, you all play the theme, and then you blow. You know, people just improvise, and you've got to improvise too. Or in terms of sport, it's a bit like football. You know, you're running around the field, and suddenly the ball comes to you, and you know you can't dictate how it comes and what speed and so on, and how many people are running at you to get the ball back. You just got to work with the moment, and it comes to you, and you've got to do something with it. And sometimes you do a good thing with it and sometimes you don't. I mean, I watch quite a lot of football on the TV, and some of the best players, you know, the brilliant Messis and Ronaldos, the goal's there gaping in front of them and they miss from 6 yards out. They miss. Messi, Ronaldo, they miss. But then they get the next one from 30 yards out. So it's similar with leading study. You can't plan it all in advance. And this is one of the things that order members who are a bit less experienced, they plan the whole thing out in advance, you know, all these notes and everything. And then it's really boring for everyone because that's not what a study group is. A study group is improvisation on a theme. So you can only do so much preparation. Then you've just got to let it have its own life. You just got to let it go and let, you know, you think, I don't want to talk about what you're talking about. Yeah, but he does. So there you are. Now he's talking about that. So what you're going to do, you've got to work with that. So you prepare, but then you improvise. And of course, And the whole point about the Ronaldos and the Messis missing the ball, the point I'm trying to make is that you will mess up sometimes. And in a 2-hour study group, you'll get some things good and some things you won't. It doesn't matter. Forget about it. Just carry on. Just doing what you can. Just improvising as you go. How are we doing for time? Oh, not bad. So, what else is there to say? Yes. So, Bhavana Maya Panya. So, in order to introduce Bhavana Maya Panya to you, I'm going to talk about the Buddha. Some of you have heard me say this before, and if you've read the introduction to my book, Great Faith, Great Wisdom, it might ring a few bells for you. But when I really discovered this, it was so exciting for me. It's like, wow, this is so important. Everyone needs to know this. And what I discovered was what in the Pali Canon is called the graduated discourse, the Buddha's graduated discourse. And he does this whenever he meets someone who he's never met before. So what happens is he meets someone and they start talking, and then the Buddha starts telling them about the Dharma, but only so much. He tells them about generosity and the rewards, the results of generosity. He tells them about renunciation and the rewards of renunciation. He tells them about ethics and the rewards of ethics, which is to live in the gods. So that's the kind of thing he talks about. General Indian, pan-Indian kind of spiritual life, which most people would be familiar with in those days. You know, that's common to most Indian traditions. But then it says, then, I've written this down, and then, when the Blessed One saw that whoever he was speaking to, their mind was ready, pliable, unbiased, exalted, and clear, then he taught them the Dharma that is particular to the Buddhas. And it could be the Four Noble Truths, or the Three Lakshanas, or conditioned co-production. In other words, he hit them with a wisdom teaching, an insight teaching, but only when he saw that their mind was ready. And the text tells you what that ready mind consists of. And the ready mind is Kala Chitta, K-A-L-L-A, Kala Chitta. You know Chitta. Chitta is mind, heart. It's your interiority, really. It's your mindset, your attitude, and so on. In order for insight to rise within you, you need to have the right mindset. You need Kala Chitta, ready or prepared for the rising of wisdom. And then there are 4 aspects to this. And the first aspect is Mudu, Mudu Chitta. Mudu means soft, gentle, tender. Lovely word, Mudu Chitta. A heart or a mind that is soft, gentle, or tender. In other words, receptive, responsive, sensitive to what the Buddha's saying. And then the next aspect is Vinivarana. Nivarana, you probably come across the word Nivarana before. Nivarana means hindrance, and usually we understand it as one of the 5 hindrances. And Vi means no, no hindrance, no hindrance. And therefore, translators translate this differently depending on how they understand the word Vinivarana. Some translators have unbiased, unobstructed, unprejudiced, chitta. Yeah? So an unbiased mind, an unprejudiced mind, and unobstructed mind. Yeah, so in other words, that can really receive the Dharma. But other translators understand this, that the Buddha is talking actually about the 5 hindrances, that they're not present, which is a very interesting way of understanding it. The 5 hindrances aren't present. In other words, the person's state of mind is really positive now. And that would go along with the next one, Uddhaka, which means exalted, elated, exultant. We could even say inspired, uplifted. That's what Uddhaka means. And that would go along with this idea of no hindrances, wouldn't it? Because if there's no hindrances, that means the mind is exalted. It's floating upwards. Yeah? And then finally, the 4th aspect to Kala Chitta is Pasana, P-A-S-A-N-N-A, which means lots of things. It's one of those wonderful Pali words which means lots. It's really, really positive term. It means clear, lucid, bright. It also means happy, gladdened, pleased. And in the Pali English dictionary, it says pleased in one's conscience. Yeah, pleased in one's conscience. I'll talk about that in a minute, perhaps. But it also means trust, faith, belief, and it also means serene, calm, tranquil. So you've got all of that in the one word. Just maybe say a few words about pleased in one's conscience. Sometimes the Buddha did the groundwork with someone and he saw that the person's mind wasn't ready, so he didn't go on to teach them the whole Dharma. No point. Well, perhaps the reason their mind wasn't ready because they hadn't lived well enough to really receive the Dharma at that point. Maybe they had things on their mind. Maybe they were weighed down with their conscience, and so they weren't able to get into the state of mind. Anyway, so this is the Kala Chitta made up of those four things. And so then what would happen is when the Buddha saw that that person's mind was ready, and you might wonder, how would he know? Did he read their mind? No need to, because in the Pali Canon as well, it talks a lot about this. There's one time when the Buddha was talking to an old man, teaching him the Dharma, and then they parted ways. And then Sariputra came along and said to the old man, "Oh, you look bright. Your skin is golden. Has the Buddha been teaching you?" And he said, "Yes, he has." So that's what happens when the Buddha teaches someone. They're brightened up. Their whole face is brightened. They're gleaming. Even their complexion is changed. And the Buddha can see this. It means they're ready now for the Dharma. So then he would teach them, the Four Noble Truths or some other wisdom teaching. And then what would happen? Text always says the same thing. Text says, and then it was as if a pure white cloth had taken the dye. I love that. A pure white cloth had taken the dye. The pure white cloth is the ready mind, and the dye is the Dharma, the wisdom of the Dharma. And I keep thinking about our cases. Pure white cloth with the dye here. This is Kala Chitta for me. Kala Chitta. And then it says the Dharma eye opened within them at that point. And then what happens is they've gained insight, they've really seen into the Dharma, and then they say, "Will you take me as your disciple? I want to go for refuge to you, the Dharma and the Sangha for the rest of my life." And the Buddha accepts them as a disciple. So, Kala Chitta, wisdom teaching, opening of the Dharma eye, and then going for refuge. That's how it happens. So, obvious what this has got to do with us as teachers, isn't it? And as, in this context, study leaders. One of our main tasks as a teacher and as a study leader is to encourage people and bring about the conditions for the people in that group to enter into the Kala Chitta. This wonderful mind, the soft, receptive, open, unobstructed, delighted, inspired, faithful state of mind, because then wisdom is likely to arise. So that's your main task. How do you do that? The best thing, or at least it makes it much easier, if you yourself are in that state of mind yourself. Yeah? That's very interesting. And one of the reasons I like teaching is because I've realized that I get into that state quite easily when I'm teaching. It's very close to jhana, this state. Obviously, it's very close. It's just another way, I think, of talking about the first jhana. And I'm one of those people, when I sit in a shrine like this, I don't get into first jhana. But when I'm teaching, I more or less do. More or less all the time. It's so easy. On the study group leader event once, an order member led a short study group, and then afterwards I said, "How was that for you?" And she said, "Oh, I really enjoyed that." And I said, "Oh, interesting. You enjoyed it. Let's go into that a bit more." So I really unpacked her state of mind with her. Tell me more about the enjoyment. And we found out that it was a general sense of enjoyment throughout the group, but then with pockets of delight coming in. I said, "Well, that sounds like piti and sukha to me." "Oh yeah, piti. Yeah, it was piti and sukha. Yeah." "And were you concentrated? Did your mind wander?" "No, mine didn't wander. I was fully there." "So you're quite concentrated?" "Yeah." "No, absorbed then." "Yeah, absorbed. Yeah." And when somebody came up with something, did your mind grasp what they were saying? Yeah. And did you stay with that with them? Yeah. Well, that sounds like initial thought and sustained thought to me. Yes, yeah. Well, that's the first jhana, is it? No. No, I never get into jhana. But you just said you had all those things happening. Yeah. Well, that's first jhana, isn't it? And it was like a revelation to her. Oh, I get into first jhana. Because she's like me. She never gets into first jhana on, well, she thinks she doesn't when she's meditating. But it's so easy to do when you're teaching. That's why it's really good to teach. One of the reasons it's really good to teach. So if you're in that state, you can invite people to join you. Yeah, much easier to do it that way round. But then, finally, what I want to say is that the next thing, as well as concentrating, getting people to concentrate and not dissipate energy and so on, the next thing is the atmosphere. And what you have to do as a study group leader, a teacher of any kind, but study group leader, is to bring about an atmosphere of friendliness and love. You have to bring about a little pure land, yeah? And in that little pure land, there's just a lot of friendliness and love and generosity and goodwill. And because when you've got that, then people feel trust, yeah? They feel trust in everyone else. And when they feel trust, they'll risk saying things that they might not risk otherwise. And that's when it gets really interesting, when they risk telling the truth, what they consider to be the truth. And they risk saying something that they think is a bit off kilter, not what they should really be saying, but they're going to say it anyway because now they love everyone. And that comes out, and then you can just go into that and talk it through. The Buddha was great at this. You know, he'd be talking to someone and the person disagreed with the Buddha, and he'd say, if you're prepared to talk on the basis of truth, we might have some conversation about this. And then they did. They just talked about that. And so you're bringing about this sense of love and generosity and friendliness so that people can really speak their minds and really listen to everyone else. And when we do that, because I think it must be more or less time to end now, we're moving into what Bhante has called the third level of consciousness. You know, the first level of consciousness is the group member. The second level of consciousness is the individual. And that's another interesting way of seeing study groups, that you're trying to help people to become individuals. But then, later on, you're trying to get them into the third level of consciousness. In participating in this order of consciousness, there is no loss of individuality. Each member is fully and completely aware of himself, and there is no giving up of individual thoughts and feelings to the collective. Rather, individual thoughts and feelings coincide freely and spontaneously, sharing a common commitment to the three jewels. Insofar as there is a coincidence of wills within the spiritual community, there is very great harmony and fellowship between its members. Each member finds others who understand and share his or her most cherished aspirations. Finally, ultimately, participation in the consciousness of the Sangha is identical with the experience of the transcendental path. So close can one member of the spiritual community come to others that the notion of a separate self, isolated from all others, is dissolved. This is what a study group is always aspiring to this level, the third level of consciousness, when we don't lose our individuality. Our individuality is distinct. We have our own thoughts and feelings, but we're not separate from others. We're really helping, we're merging with each other, helping each other to collectively find the truth. This is what a study group is always aspiring to, and probably most of the time failing. And probably you know, this all sounds really great. It's all very aspirational. Well, now when you lead a study group tomorrow morning, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be all over the place, and people are going to be a bit annoying, and you're going to get frustrated, and someone's going to joke again. And you're going to think, oh no. But that's what you have to work with. You have to keep on working with that over and over and over again, trying to find a clearing out of which you stop talking so much and listen to everyone else and collectively find the truth.